Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm delighted to be here with you. I thank you very much for joining, for listening, and for watching. And I would ask you please to subscribe to the channel and share these shows as far and wide as possible. It does benefit me in one way or another, so thank you for that. Today we have a fascinating show. The topic of our interview is, what is the Torah position for supporting the 45th and 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump? My guest who will deal with this question is someone whom I respect deeply. He is a friend, a Jewish community leader, and someone whom I have interviewed a number of times, and he has interviewed me and made quite a few changes, helped me make changes in my life. His name is Rabbi Daniel Korobkin. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thanks, Avram. Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you too. Rabbi Korobkin is a senior rabbi at the Beth Avrum Yosef of Toronto congregation, and that is one of the largest Orthodox shuls in the world. He has served pulpits in San Diego, in Los Angeles, and Allentown, Pennsylvania. He's a translator and annotator of the Feldman edition of Rabbi Yehuda Levi's Kuzari, and we did an interview on that. Rabbi Korobkin is the past president of the Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA, the largest fraternal order of Orthodox rabbis in North America. He is a husband to a wonderful woman, and he is the father of 10. Once again, welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you.
So today what we are dealing with is our discussion is all about a Torah perspective on support for President Donald Trump. And
I'm glad you prefaced it by saying a Torah perspective, because I would be that would be too much of a reach to say that I represent the Torah perspective, because I'm sure that there are plenty of people who are great scholars of Torah and will probably have diametrically opposite views from myself.
So I actually want to delve into that point in one moment. Before I do, I just want to comment on the genesis of this idea. I myself have come out quite a bit against Donald Trump because my perspective on him is he is a terrible character. He's not a good man. He's not a decent human being. And the idea that I would support him as a Jew is anathema to my values, and something which I'm not comfortable with at all. That being said, I know very little when it comes to Torah, and I am very curious about what I am missing, and perhaps what other people are missing as well. There are many people within the Jewish world, in particular the Frum, the religious world, the Haredi world, who support Donald Trump. And that is something that we have to be cognizant of and aware of. It's important that we recognize all aspects of our peoplehood, of our nation. The idea being Shivim Panim, that there are 70 faces to truth, and that is one of them. So the genesis of the idea was to dive into that a little bit for an hour or so and see what we can come up with, and to hear from someone who's a Torah scholar on his ideas, re-support for Donald Trump. Now, Rabbi, you are an American, so you're kind of visiting Canada. Welcome.
I am a dual citizen. I am both an American and a Canadian.
Mazel tov. When did you get your citizenship?
A couple of months ago.
How does it feel?
Feels good, eh?
Did you have to incorporate that into your language? Good for you.
Yeah.
So you're an American.
I've been here. This is our 14th year here, so it's about time, I think.
That would be a chazaka, right? Status quo.
Yeah.
So let's start with a real basic question. You are a Torah Jew, and that means that the way you lead your life is through halacha, that you investigate what Judaism has to say about most issues, if not all issues. What is your basic premise when it comes to support of President Donald Trump through a Torah lens?
It's very simple. When you are looking for the right political leader, your criteria are very different from choosing the right religious leader. And I think that's where people get confused. When you're looking for a religious leader, someone who will be a mentor, someone who will be a role model for the way you want to live your life, that is someone that you look for. There's a whole different set of criteria for what you're looking for. You want a person who is not only ethical and moral, but is a good communicator, is kind, is compassionate, is sensitive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you're looking for a political leader, you want someone who will get results that will be favorable to the country in which you live and for the Jewish people at the same time. Two completely different set of criteria. And it's for that reason that regardless of what a person may think about the character of Donald Trump, which I'm happy to explore further, I don't agree with you that he's a bad person. I think he's a poor communicator, and I think he has an aggressive side to him, which he's learned over the years of being a businessman. And perhaps it's a product of his upbringing and his culture more than anything. But regardless of what you think of his character, the most important thing to look at when you're looking towards getting a good political leader is pure and simple utilitarian results. Is he going to be good for our country, and is he going to be good for the Jewish people?
Well, would that diverge from how God looked at Moshe Rabbeinu as an example? Because some of his function was political. You might argue that with Joshua as well, who was very much of a military man. But there was both the spirituality that they were ensconced in and responsible for the Jewish people, but also the political aspect of it. The sense.
Again, I think you're making a fundamental error in your comparison.
Yes.
Both Moses and Joshua were not just political leaders; they were spiritual leaders as well. And with that said, because look, Moses was the giver of the law. If he was flawed in his spiritual connection to God, he could not be an effective communicator of the Torah and transmitter of the Torah. And the same thing goes with Joshua, who lived in that very nascent period of time when the Torah was being transmitted. He was Moses' primary disciple. There are scant periods in Jewish history where the leaders were exclusively political, or shouldn't say maybe exclusively political, but primarily political. Examples of those are Samson in the book of Judges, Yiftach also in the book of Judges. These are people who are acknowledged by the Talmud as not having been completely savory individuals, but they were needed at a particular time and place for the Jewish people at a very delicate juncture in Jewish history, where it was more important for there to be purely a military leader than a spiritual leader. But for the vast majority of Jewish history, all of our political leaders have also been spiritual leaders.
So I guess the fundamental point that you're making here, and tell me if I'm accurate, is that you want a president, a leader in this case, who is someone who, as you said, can produce results.
Right.
What is a challenge to me, and I think a challenge to many, is that President Trump has spoken in many times in a very crass, vulgar way, right? He is what we would say in Hebrew has been mavayish barabim. Most recently, he embarrassed the leader of Ukraine, Zelensky, in the Oval Office for millions of people to see. He's felonious. He's been up in court many times for felony charges and in fact has been found guilty. Do you not look at that as a Torah Jew and say, oh my gosh, this is not a man that I would leave with my children?
Oh, I would have no problem leaving my children with Trump as a babysitter for a short period of time. Okay. I reject the premise that he's a felonious person. I think that that there was a witch hunt against Trump. I think that the legal system was armed politically by opponents, by his political opponents. And I think that we're only discovering the tip of the iceberg as far as how corrupt the judicial system in the United States is. And Trump's prosecutions are just sort of the prime example of that. As far as his being what you would say crass, or in Yiddish we would say grub, or he's a voluntary Prust, yeah, right. I completely concur with that. And I am not looking towards him for guidance as far as how I should be as a communicator towards my midot, my ethical behavior and my character. Look, we're coming up in just tomorrow night. It's going to be Purim.
Yes.
And we can look at the Purim story. I just gave a class about how it's necessary for every Jew to look at the story of Purim as something that can provide a contemporary message. For me, the contemporary message is that the modern day Achashverosh, the king of Persia, is Donald Trump. Achashverosh is debated in the Talmud as whether he was a fool or a wise man. And in reality, he was a little bit of both, because he was very easily swayed by his advisors and the people that were around him. But also at the same time, he was judicious in the way that he treated the Jews and was able to see the truth in the end. I see that as very Trump-esque. And if we look at the Megillah itself, and here's where I think that, if you were to ask me the question, what are the main reasons why the Jewish community stands squarely behind Donald Trump? Mm-hmm. I would tell you it's really three factors, and they're related to, at least partially, to the story of Esther. Number one, it is the fact that he is a huge supporter of Israel and the Jewish people. Number two, he is fiscally responsible, and that's also recorded in the Megillah, that at the end of the story of Purim, because he was such a strong political leader, he was able to successfully impose taxes upon the entire Persian Empire and build the empire even stronger. And finally, number three, ideologically, Trump has waged a war against all of those values in Western society that Orthodox Jews deem to be antithetical to Torah Judaism. So he is fighting against DEI. He's fighting against woke ideology, liberal supporters of BLM and other movements that have had a caustic effect upon religion and religious communities in the United States, and especially the fact that these kinds of liberal movements have been in the same camp, the same bailiwick, as those who support the Palestinians and Hamas, etc. So for those three things, his support of Israel and the Jews, his founding of Doge and his fiscal responsibility and strengthening the financial state of the country, and finally his fight against woke ideology and liberal ideology that has a caustic effect on religion, those are the three primary reasons that you're going to find that a lot of Jews are supportive of Trump.
I think when we look at, his whole body of work, at least in the last 7 or 8 weeks, we will see some of that. There's no question about it. His support for Israel is very strong. But by the same token, he has also begun to cut many jobs to impact upon people's lives in America and around the world. He, together with Elon Musk, have targeted veterans in the United States, the Agency for International Development, USA, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Department of Agriculture, and the list goes on and on and on. Inflation is going up. It's not going down. So I understand your 3 points, and I appreciate why you would be supportive of Donald Trump. But what about all that other stuff? What about?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't accept the premise of what you've said, that everything is going to hell in a handbasket. He's been president for 50 days, and he's a disruptor. But first and foremost, he's a businessman. I trust him that he knows how to control the economy. Mm-hmm. And when you're going to be a disruptor, there's going to be a drop in the stock market. We're all feeling that pain, anyone who's an investor in the market. There's going to be a temporary dip in the economy. but that's what we call in Hebrew a yerida litzorech aliyah. In order for there to really to rehabilitate the country and to pull us out of this horrible deficit that the United States finds itself in, there's going to have to be some painful belt tightening, and then things are going to get better. I don't accept the fact that he's in any way deprived veterans of benefits. I think that's propaganda. I think USAID is clearly a bureaucracy that was trying to be sort of like this, what do they call it? This covert government agency that was trying to work outside of the will of the people. And I am, for one, very happy that they've been shut down, because by many estimates, and I don't know how true this is, but it's just based on what I've read, the USAID has supplied surreptitiously through UNRWA and other organizations over $2 billion to Hamas over the last few years. So for that reason alone, I'm glad that they're shut down. And it's not just that Trump is a supporter of Israel. He has completely changed the paradigm of the way that the U.S. now relates to Israel. Under the Biden administration, Israel was fighting with one hand tied behind its back, and there was no movement whatsoever in trying to get the hostages freed, or at least minimal effort. And under Trump, one of the very first things that he accomplished within the first week or two of his presidency was getting a steady dribble of hostages released. And there's still the same kind of hard press that Trump is playing. He's now denied $400 million to Columbia University. He's deporting people who are supporters of Hamas. This is a game changer. This is not just, he supports Israel. This is a complete reversal of what we've seen to date.
Rabbi, in terms of the comments that he's made, of which are many and regular, we wake up to brand new stuff every single morning. He really is the surprise president. There have been a lot of fact checkers who have shown that he is an incessant liar, that he tells mistruths all the time. And I think there was one report that said in his first presidency, there were something like 30,000 lies that he told, and maybe that's dramatic. But the fact of the matter is, at least he does not have a problem with a lot of hyperbole. Within Judaism, the idea of truth, emes, saying what's right, and not lying is extraordinarily important. Does that play into your Torah perception of him at all?
Avrum, can you name one politician in modern history who has not lied? Give me one.
To that extent, Rabbi?
I'm just asking you for one. Give me one name.
I can't.
Impossible.
Yes.
Impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians lie all the time. And so, again, it goes back to the original premise. If you're looking for a paragon of virtue, you're looking in the wrong direction. Politicians will do what is expedient for the success of their polity. They are not people that you look towards finding virtuous behavior and truthfulness and honesty and decency and sensitivity, et cetera, et cetera.
He's certainly not a paragon of virtue. I think that's correct. But do you think he's a good man?
I do think that deep down he is a good man. And the reason is because he supports the Jewish people. And I think, at least in my mind, you can divide the world in two parts.
Yes. The
good people support the Jews. The bad people hate the Jews. And so for that reason alone, he's a good person. I think that if you read some of the stories of what has not really been that public, Trump is a charitable person. He is a philanthropist, and he's quietly supported individuals who have been down on their luck for decades, long before he was in the political sphere. So I think people on the left have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to characterizing him based on all of the propaganda that's coming out of the Democratic Party, trying to paint this man as a villain. I do not believe he's a villain. I do not believe he is any worse of a liar than any previous politician. If anything, if you look at some of the statements that Biden and Obama have made during their presidency, I think that the truth meter might be more in favor of Trump's lies than they are when compared to those other two presidents.
Rabbi, I've spoken with many people in the Frum community who are supportive of Donald Trump. Many people have been very uncomfortable and not happy with some of the statements that I've made online. So I've had that tete-a-tete, that back and forth, which I think is actually very, very healthy.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Doesn't feel good at all because everybody has a theory about Trump, and people get very, very fervent within their ideas and their opinions. But one of the things I picked up, and I hear this regularly, I'd love to hear you comments on it, is that there is this sense that there's a messianic temperature in the room when it comes to Donald Trump. That the Ribbono Shel Olam, that God has put Donald Trump on this earth to almost be responsible for a kapara to the world. And it's not unusual for people to tell me literally. They say, that there's something very messianic going on. On July 3rd, 2024, Donald Trump was speaking in Butler, Pennsylvania, and an assassin's bullet rang out, directed at him. He moved ever so slightly, and it nicked his ear. There are many rabbis that I've found online who speak about this as being a nace, being a miracle. In your mind, is there something messianic about him and or these times? Was that a nace? Was that a miracle?
There's a famous phrase in the Talmud: "I am not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet."
Yes.
I do not presume to know what God is what God's will is, other than He wants us to be good people and follow His Torah and be faithful to His precepts. Anyone who presumes to know what is happening in the world today is really speaking perhaps out of hand and perhaps even foolishly. What I would say is that we as Jews are optimists by nature,
Mhm.
and we are always looking for signs of messianic times. We say a prayer weekly for the state of Israel. And we call the founding of the state of Israel from 1948, Reshit Smichat Gulatenu. It is the first sprouting of our redemption. Do we know that the state of Israel is the first sprouting of our redemption with absolute certitude? We do not. We are making a hopeful faith affirmation that we hope that it is the beginning of our redemption. Do we hope that with the advent of President Trump, things are going to get better and better until we reach, messianic end times? Sure. There's nothing wrong with looking at current events and saying, maybe these things are portents for a greater future. Maybe it was a miracle. Maybe this is a sign from God. But I don't know. There's no one who can possibly know. If a person feels that his faith is bolstered by making those kinds of statements, more power to them. But I would caution anyone who is making those kinds of prognostications to be very careful. Because remember, Trump is going to be president for the next 4 years. And then someone else, probably more likely from the liberal side, is going to be taking over for him. And we don't know what's going to happen after these 4 years are over. It could be really bad times for the Jews, God forbid, after Trump's presidency. And we don't know what the rest of his presidency is going to look like. Is it going to be a glorious linear upward future for the Jews in the state of Israel? That still remains to be seen. God knows what's going to happen. We don't know.
There's some beautiful mitzvot within the Torah which speak about unity, friendship, embracing those individuals who are your enemies, not only not good friends, but enemies. As an example, we just learned this a little while ago. When you're walking along the road and you see the ass, the donkey of your enemy has fallen, you have a chiyuv, you have an obligation to go over there and help that individual, as long as they want to do it themselves, to pick up that donkey. I think that it's safe to say that Judaism is all about achdus, about bringing people together, about unity. I also think it's safe to say that is not Donald Trump's bailiwick, right? You see that?
Well, look, here's the thing. I don't think that he views his role to be a unifier of the world. He's not the global president of the world. He's the president of the United States. And as the president of the United States, he views his role as making sure that the country is the strongest possible United States it can be.
Mhm.
And his whole worldview is, as a businessman, he views the dollar as the driver of strengthening the United States more than anything else. And so, 25 years ago, he wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. And one of the things that he wrote in this is always exploit your advantage over the guy that you're negotiating with on the other side of the table. And so that's what he's doing. When he tries to intimidate people, he's merely exercising his advantage over his adversary, the person with whom he's negotiating. He's done that with Zelensky in order to bring him to the ceasefire table, which I think actually in the end run, if he gets the results that we're all looking for, which is an end to the carnage between Russia and Ukraine, that ultimately is a good thing, even if it means embarrassing him publicly in order to get that done. If we can save lives through it, it's worth it. And I would say the same thing in all of the other things that he's doing. If he can negotiate peace, and it means being very coarse in the means of getting that done, then it's worth it.
Did you cringe, however, as a rabbi, as a good man yourself, just as a decent human being, when you watched him in the Oval Office with Zelensky?
Sure,
President
absolutely.
of the United States? Yeah.
Absolutely. I would hate to be Zelensky in that situation. But I also have to say that, having listened to Zelensky extensively, there was a great podcast with Lex Friedman.
Mhm.
That was a 3-hour exchange that Friedman had with Zelensky. Zelensky is relentless in his condemnation of Putin as a butcher, as an executioner, as evil personified. And that's the way he went into the Oval Office with his opening words. And that was also inappropriate. You don't, if you're coming in ostensibly to work on a ceasefire with your enemy, your opening words should not be, I can't negotiate with this man because he's a liar and a butcher. So I think Zelensky himself made some very serious errors in judgment when he came into the Oval Office, and he had to pay the price of being humiliated as a result.
And from a Jewish point of view, a Torah point of view, taking a look how Trump really cozies up to Putin, who's a former KGB guy, not known for being really nice, actually murdering his enemies. I think that's documented. He decided that he was going to change American policy and align himself with Putin, with Russia.
I don't agree with that statement. He's not aligning himself with Russia. He's trying to get two sides, two countries that are entrenched in a battle of real hatred against each other, to the negotiating table to put an end to the war. And when you do that, you have to align yourself with both sides.
I mean, I think NATO would disagree with you, with all due respect, Rabbi.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
They're working
That's
arduously to figure out how to protect themselves, because they feel as though they have been dropped by America. Right?
Yeah, so that's, again, I don't agree with that premise. The U.S. is not going to drop NATO. Trump has always been, even in his first term, arguing that the U.S. provides a disproportionate amount of funding to NATO, especially when we're divided by the Atlantic Ocean. We should not be paying, the U.S. should not be paying the lion's share of the funding for NATO. Europe should. And that's all he's been arguing all along.
Rabbi, there's a concept within Judaism, and again, you're going to help me with this, as you have with many Jewish ideas, of the Jewish people. We need to be responsible and take care of ourselves. And that's, again, a very healthy thing, because as a family member, you really guard your kids first, right? And you make sure that after that, you go out to the neighborhood, to the city, to the world in which we live. I'd like to understand from you, within a Torah framework, what is the idea of, I'll call it Yidden first, the idea that Jews go first, and what are the lines that come along with that?
Well, I don't ever feel I've ever said that phrase, Yidden first, Jews come first. But I think there's sort of an implicit doctrine within every ethnic minority that we have to take care of our own first, and then we take care of the rest of the world second. And I think if that's what you're referring to, where charity begins at home, which is a basic Jewish precept, that when we talk about helping other people, there's a whole set of, there's a hierarchy of criteria, even within the mitzvah of tzedakah, that if you have a relative who is poor and needs financial support, that relative takes priority over other poor people in the Jewish community. And the same thing would be true that if there's a Jewish need within the community, that takes priority over a need that, let's say, is a general population need. And if there's a Canadian need, that need in Canada takes priority over something that's going on the other side of the world. It's just a basic concept that is pretty universal, I think, to all ethnic groups.
So with that, there is another idea within Judaism which is called Darkei Shalom, which is ways to peace, and it's a beautiful idea that really encourages Jews to be cognizant of how to bring Darkei Shalom, how to bring peace into a given environment. Do we as Jews then have a responsibility when it comes to Darkei Shalom, not only to ourselves, but to the broader world in which we live?
There's no question that the Jewish people have to be, as Isaiah said, a light unto the nations. And we have to be conscientious of the fact that the world is not comprised of the Jews only. We have to be sensitive to the fact that we were placed in this world among other nations in order to be a positive influence and to help wherever we can be a positive influence. And so, if you wanted to, let's say, criticize the Orthodox community for failing to see that in the past, I think that would be a fair criticism. The Orthodox community, by and large, has not done a stellar job in getting involved in the world at large. Some have, but I would say the majority have not. And that's unfortunate, and something that I speak to my congregation about regularly, that we have a civic duty to play a role within the larger community in which we live, and we have to be good citizens of whatever country we live in. We have to be good Canadians. We have to support the police. We have to support the fire department. We have to be philanthropic outside of our own community as well.
So with that, would you say that it is a responsibility for we Jews to be cognizant of the policies of the Trump government and our government here in Canada in terms of how we treat immigrants? And if we're not satisfied that we're doing a good job of it, does the Jewish community have to go out there and challenge Donald Trump to his approach and say, this is not in sync with our values?
If indeed we're not happy. I have not seen anything that Trump has done to date that I would object to regarding immigration. Trump is not anti-immigration. He's anti-illegal immigration. And Biden's policies of an open border, both from the South and the North, have been a disaster for the United States. The amount of fentanyl that's come in, we know in our own community, we had a young man tragically pass away from a fentanyl overdose because of his acquisition of illicit drugs. And the fact that the United States has this, it's a plague. It's an epidemic in the United States of fentanyl overdose. And there is violent crime in the large cities. And that is largely a result of illegal immigrants being allowed to come into the country, many of them being part of drug cartels and gangs and the like. And that's something that I would support. I'm a law and order kind of person, and I believe that every single Jew has an obligation to do so as well. As Maimonides says, if a person is compassionate upon the criminal, then he is being cruel to the law-abiding citizens of his country.
Are you not concerned that just as the Jewish people in the 30s were castigated for being vultures, for being cheap, for trying to take over, as we saw in the Torah as well, Pharaoh was worried these people will get stronger than us. Are you not at all concerned, again, from a Torah Jewish point of view, that we are creating animals or creatures out of these immigrants? I mean, that is the overall narrative.
That may be your narrative. That's not my narrative. If a person comes into a country illegally, they deserve to be deported. Full stop. There's nothing more. It's not more simple than that. A country cannot preserve its integrity if it doesn't have rules of immigration. When I came to this country, I went through a process. And as you know, now I'm a Canadian citizen, thank God.
It's muzzle tough.
But I did so using a legal system that Canada has in place in order to preserve its national integrity. The United States has an obligation to do the same.
Rabbi, the great Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed away a little while ago, he said that populism has reemerged in the West as it did in the 1930s, posing great danger to the future of freedom. He says populism is the politics of anger. It makes its appearance where there is widespread discontent with political leaders, when people feel the heads of institutions are working in their own interests rather than that of the general public, when there is a widespread loss of trust and a breakdown of the sense of the common good. Do you feel as though that is the Donald Trump administration, an administration of populism that works off anger and serves to divide people? And then part B of that question is, what's the optimum political approach within a Jewish construct?
Okay, let's take part A first. There's no question that there was a wave of populism that propelled Trump to win the election, and now to have that the Republican Party has an 80% approval rating in the United States, and that the Democratic Party only has a 20% approval rating. There's no question that that's because of this populist movement of people being fed up with bureaucrats making decisions that are completely antithetical to the interests of the rest of the population. That, I would say, is certainly the case. I don't accept the premise that this then is the source of dividing people. I would say, if anything, that in the previous presidential regime, there was a lot more divisiveness than there is today. People, the whole concept of labeling people based on their ethnic origins is extremely divisive, and this whole concept of hiring people based on their racial origin instead of their qualifications was a huge divider. People were more conscious of their racial and ethnic identity under a regime that focuses on identity politics more so than in any other time in my lifetime. And so I think the divisiveness was at a shrill tone under the Biden and Obama administrations more so than under Trump. Tell me again what part B is.
I'm very curious as to what Torah says about the optimum political model should be. How should a country look in terms of the way it deals with its citizens, the way it deals with the world?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And unfortunately, the ideal method of political, let's say, philosophy can be found in the Torah for the nation of Israel. The problem with that is that the political system that is set up in the Torah, which is that you have the general population that is working, and then you have one tribe that are the spiritual members of the society, the spiritual leaders, who are financially supported by the rest of the population, by the other 11 tribes. That kind of system, and that everyone is obligated to tithe their agriculture and their earnings accordingly. That system is based upon a nation of Israel living in the land of Israel that has a certain bar of behavior, of ethical and moral responsibility and character. That biblical system does not translate well into other systems of governments at other times in history. So if you're looking from a Judaic source for the ideal system of government, you can find it, but you have to know how to apply it to a population and to a period in history. And that's not so easy to do.
I think it's safe to say, and I think most people would agree with this, that Donald Trump has extended himself to Israel in a number of different ways and fighting anti-Semitism. My great worry is that at some point in time, somebody within Israel is going to look at askance at Donald Trump, and he's going to take great umbrage at how he is being treated, because we all know that many of his responses to things are predicated on how the person on the other end of the table is looking at him, is talking to him. We saw the European leaders came to visit him recently, and they just short of kissed his ring. Canada's not doing that, and we are really a target of his. My big worry, Rabbi Korobkin, is that there is going to come a time that he is going to decide that Israel no longer works for him, and that the Jewish people are anathema to what he wants to accomplish. He said when he was running for president, he said, if I lose this election, it'll be the responsibility of the Jewish people. That's a very heavy statement. He's let go all the people he surrounded himself with in his first administration. He let go, and they all wrote books about him, about his inability as a leader. Do you have any concerns whatsoever as a supporter of Donald Trump that day will come?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you always have to be concerned about a political leader. Political leaders are fickle. It's happened all the time throughout Jewish history. Take a look again at the story of Esther. Ahasuerus was a fickle king. He supported Haman originally, and then when it was brought to his attention that his queen was under threat, he completely changed his position from night to day, a complete 180 reversal. And is it possible that King Ahasuerus or Donald Trump could do another 180 and do another complete reversal? Of course it is. And that's why we have to be vigilant. We have to be respectful of the United States so long as we are dependent upon the United States. And Israel's political leaders have to know how to play the political game correctly. And it's the responsibility of the Israeli government to, as you say, kiss his ring and make sure that the relationship remains strong and that there's no daylight between Israel and the U.S. Just like Prime Minister Harper said during his reign as Prime Minister over Canada, that there is no daylight between Canada and Israel. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. We hope that it'll be the case in the future, but that's really where things stand between the U.S. and Israel, and we hope that it stays that way. Do we have to be vigilant, and we have to be careful, and we have to monitor the president's rhetoric and his behavior? 100%. But right now, things are good, and we should appreciate and be grateful for the blessing that we have coming out of the United States. That a Jew is supposed to view as a gift from God.
And how should we express that appreciation?
How?
Yes.
Well, I think what Netanyahu and the rest of the governmental leaders, from what I'm seeing, are doing. I'm not aware of everything that's going on. Is that they're acting appropriately, and they're being extremely conciliatory and obsequious even to the president and to the Secretary of State and to his entire cabinet. And that's the way you should be, so long as you're dependent upon the U.S.
Rabbi, I think it's safe to say as well that there is some real divisiveness within the Jewish community having to do for its support of Donald Trump. There are clearly those who feel that his presidency is anathema to a peace and to approaching the world in a unifying way. And then others, such as yourself and many people who are within the Frum community and otherwise, are actually extraordinarily supportive of his administration. In terms of that dynamic within our Jewish community and the divisiveness that he's a very polarizing figure is creating, how best should we deal with the other Jew, with the Jew on the other side of the table, who has a Yiddish neshama, has a Jewish soul, but his political views are anathema to yours?
Okay, it's a great question. First thing I want to say is, I teach a class on Mondays from Rabbi Sadia Gaon called Emunot Videot. And he has a very interesting discussion of the philosophy of epistemology, of how people gain knowledge. And one of the greatest mistakes he says that people make is when they work on defining reality, not based upon empirical data, but rather based on their own ideological beliefs that take priority over what they're actually experiencing and perceiving in the outside world. Those Jews, I mean, you described it as saying that Donald Trump is anathema to peace. And I would just say to those people, first of all, putting aside the fact that we have to unify Jews, I'm somewhat incredulous how anyone could believe that Donald Trump is anathema to peace based on what's going on in the last 50 days of his new presidency. The only way that a person can come to that kind of conclusion, that he's an evil man, that he's a bad man, that he's a warmonger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is only if he's formed that ideological belief in his mind and refuses to look at what's going on in the world today. You have to be blind in order to come up with that kind of conclusion. So I just want to put that out there first.
Yes.
I think that any person who wants to be, who is a truth seeker and wants to be able to objectively arrive at what is the correct thing that's going on in the world and how a person should react to what's going on in the world is put aside your ideology for a moment and just open your eyes and see what's happening in the world today. Trump is actively attempting to bring peace to the Middle East. He's actively trying to bring peace to Russia and Ukraine. And put aside all of the ideological animus you may have towards Trump as a human being or as a politician, what he stands for, and just give him credit for at least making the attempt to bring peace to the world. Now, to your question of what do we do with our fellow Jew who may be completely ideologically opposed to us, I think that, first of all, a Jew is a Jew, and we have to love each other regardless of our different opinions. The Talmud says that just like our faces are unique and no two people look exactly alike, our beliefs are different. Every single human being has a unique perspective and unique point of view. I can love you, Avram, even though I may not agree with you politically. You're my friend, you're my brother, and it doesn't matter what your ideological beliefs are. I may think that you're like way mistaken and you're so wrongheaded about certain things, but I still can love you and we can still break bread together and enjoy life together and love each other just like two brothers can. Okay. And that's, I think, is so important. Are there limits to that? I think there are limits. And I'll tell you what I think that the ultimate limit is. When you find Jews who support Hamas, when you find Jews who feel that we have to dismantle the Israeli government, I think that's where the ideological line has to be drawn. Israel is facing an existential threat from its enemies in the region. Any Jew who tries to aid and abet the enemies of Israel, which means to weaken the state of Israel in some way, to contribute towards that existential threat, I think that's a Jew who has sort of lost that privilege of being part of our people. And I say that with great pain in my heart, because I still, again, I believe that these people are simply not opening their eyes to what the reality of what's going on in the world. And they're allowing their ideology to blind them to the reality of what is. And so I say very regretfully that we have to sort of cut off that gangrenous limb from those Jews who are actively supporting our enemies. But anything short of that, whether you're a liberal, whether you're a conservative, whether you're anything in between or beyond or before, I think we have to embrace each other despite our political differences.
Rabbi, I'm wondering if you've considered the following. I take a look at supporters of Trump, such as yourself. And the pattern that I see in my head is that you will look at his actions, let's say over the last 70 days or whatever it happens to be. And in your mind, you see him as and you've said this, as a man of peace. I look at the fact that he is targeting Canada, that he is targeting Greenland, that he is targeting Panama, that he does not seem to be a friend to NATO, and I'm not certain, and certainly Europe is not certain that alliance will stay in place. I see that he's aligned himself with Russia. I'll even call it the Soviet Union, as it was, and he befriends dictators. Yet he goes at individual or countries who could clearly be construed as allies. My question to you is, what is it about you? What is it about me that looks at a bowl of fruit, you know, and you see that bowl of fruit as being luscious and healthy and something that you really want to eat? It's very edible. I look at it, I go, you know what? I see that it's really rotting. What is it about human nature, about humankind, that we can see things in such a different way?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
if anyone has the answer to that question, it's a
Give us a call.
multifaceted answer, and there's no way I think that we can fully answer that question, why people see the same thing completely differently from each other. Um, like I said, people are diverse. People have different ways of thinking, and we just have to respect and celebrate the diversity of humanity. Again, like I said, with limits. There is, I believe, based on my Judaic upbringing, that there is absolute good and absolute evil. There are people who are relativistic morally and feel that there is no absolute good and absolute evil, and therefore all human beings have to be treated with the same level of respect and dignity and so forth. There are certain ideological differences that exist. And as far as why you see his tough negotiating positions and using his financial advantages of the United States, look, Trump views the United States as just one big corporate entity. And when you're dealing, if you look at the United States and the geopolitics as just all about business negotiations, he's going to use whatever advantages he has against valuable neighbors like Greenland, Canada, and Mexico. He's going to use that to his advantage, and Panama is going to use that to his advantage as much as he can. And he's going to come to the negotiating table already intimidating the opponent on the other side of the table. This doesn't mean he's not a man of peace. It means that he's a tough business negotiator. And Canada is still trying to figure out, the Canadian leaders are still trying to figure out how to deal with someone like that they've never had to deal with before. I'm not sure whether any of the Canadian leaders have fully figured it out, whether from the Conservative or the Liberal parties. But I'm hopeful that Canada will figure out that to take a tough stance against Trump and to use a lot of bluster and a lot of bravado, I would suggest that that's ill-advised, because it won't work on a guy like Trump. You can't outsmart the smart guy at the table who knows that he's got all of the chips and that knows that his cards are better than the other players. So I think, if I can continue that poker analogy, Trump is going to exploit the fact that he knows that he's got a good hand and that Canada does not have as good of a hand as he does. Remember, what percentage of Canada's trade is to the United States? Is it 60%, 70%?
It's very high, something like that.
Yeah. And the United States' amount of trade with Canada is about 2% of its GDP. So by all metrics, the U.S. has the advantage in negotiating table over Canada, whether you like it or not. And so I think that Canada has to sort of face that reality and react accordingly. Now, maybe it is doing the correct thing. I don't know. I'm not there in the parliament to know everything that's going on. But what I can tell you is that trying to use bravado and bluster is not going to work against Trump.
Yeah, I hear you, Rabbi, and I understand from a negotiating point of view. But when I see how Donald Trump is dealing with Canada, to me, he's like a kid who's making a mess, right? And your response to that is clean up the mess. Stop it. There's no reason for this. So I'm coming at this from a much different point of view than you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The idea that we have to know how to negotiate with them. What, to keep our country?
No, Canada can keep its country. It's a question of how to remain financially prosperous and to remain economically sound. That's what Trump is putting the Canadians' feet to the fire with, with these kinds of tough rhetoric.
I think by most measurements, Rabbi, the the economic relationship between the United States and Canada is an extraordinary, healthy one, likely the best in the world. So why is he creating this mess? I don't know. I don't think people know. And I think that's what the problem is here. You say that politicians don't know how to deal with it. Yeah, because they don't know what the starting point is.
Oh, to me, it's very simple.
Yeah.
He just wants to get the most economic prosperity for the United States. And if he feels that the U.S. in the past has negotiated a deal that doesn't get us the most money from our partners, our international partners, he's going to try to renegotiate the deal. That's pure and simple what he's all about.
Okay. In conclusion, I think that Donald Trump is basically an unknown in so many ways. That is both his strength and I would argue his weakness as well. One never really knows what the next executive order is going to be, what his response to an individual is going to be, to a journalist, etc. So therefore, we don't know what the future holds. And my question to you, Rabbi, is very simple. What is the red line that you draw in terms of your support for President Donald Trump? And what would he have to do to go over that red line?
It's hard to know what the red line is before you see what's coming down the road. As long as Trump is strongly behind the state of Israel and the Jewish people, he will continue to receive certainly my support and my blessing. Not that he needs it, right? Of course, but I think that every Jew who looks at the state of Israel as being the necessary lifeblood of the Jewish people. It is our sanctuary. It is a place where we know that if things get too rotten in the diaspora communities, we always have that sanctuary to go to. It is the most important political agenda. It should be the most important political agenda for every Jew. The fact that it's not for a lot of Orthodox Jews is much to my dismay. But that's certainly my philosophy, my political philosophy. So as long as Trump keeps Israel strong, he will always get my support.
I so enjoy being with you, and I so enjoy talking with you, although our political views are stridently different.
Same here, Avrum. It's always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. You know why, Rabbi? Because I think that one of your strengths is your ability to bring people together. I do. And I've seen it many, many times over the years through your pulpit. And I commend you for that. I think it's extraordinarily important in these times and any times, but in particular now. So I say to you, Yesha Koach, as they say in the vernacular. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for being with me today and having this challenging discussion. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Avram. And thank you for all the great work you're doing. Shkoyach to you as well. Continue to bring the light of Judaism and the light of Torah to places where without you, that light would not penetrate. So
Thank you,
keep
Rabbi.
up the great work.
I appreciate your kind words. I want to conclude with a prayer for the IDF soldiers, and it goes as follows. He who blessed our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, may he bless the fighters of the Israel Defense Forces who stand guard over our land and the cities of our God, from the border of Lebanon to the deserts of Egypt, and from the great sea unto the approach of the Arava, on the land, in the air, and on the sea. May the Almighty cause the enemies who rise up against us to be struck down before them. May the Holy One, blessed He, preserve and rescue our fighters from every trouble and distress, and from every plague and illness. And may He send blessing and success in their every endeavor. And may He lead our enemies under our soldiers' sway. And may He grant them salvation and crown them with victory. And may there be fulfilled for them the verse, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you to battle, your enemies for you to save you.
Amen.
Folks, thank you very much for listening and for watching. Please feel free to ask any questions on this interview or other ones. You can reach me at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. And I would just simply like to say, Yisrael Chai, that the nation of Israel lives. Be proud to be a Jew. Be proud to be a Canadian, Rabbi, because we are a great nation, and we're happy to have you.
I'm a proud Canadian. I love this country.
We're happy to have you. Until we meet again, as they say in Yiddish, go in health Chag Sameach, happy Purim, and just make the world great and be involved. Get involved. Make sure that you're part of the solution. Thank you so much.